On a quiet street in South Carolina, an elderly black woman opened her door to a shivering, bruised boy with eyes too tired for his age. She did not ask questions. She simply pulled him inside, wrapped him in warmth, and promised he was safe now. That single act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Years passed. Seasons turned. The boy grew into a man, one who wore a suit, carried authority in his voice, and walked with a purpose few could shake. One spring morning long, after she had nearly forgotten the sound of his footsteps, there was another knock at her door. But this time, the man standing there was not broken. He was powerful, and he had come back with a promise. Before we dive into the full story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We love hearing your thoughts, because what you are about to witness is how one small act of mercy can echo through decades until it comes home, knocking when you least expect it. In the heart of South Carolina, just off a winding road lined with crepe myrtle trees and leaning mailboxes, there sat a small house at the corner of Maplewood Lane. The paint on the shutters had faded years ago, and the porch steps creaked with every footfall, but no one in the neighborhood cared about that. What mattered was the feeling the house gave off, a quiet invitation, like the door might open for anyone needing comfort. Inside lived Miss Evelyn Parker, a woman both ordinary and extraordinary in ways only time could teach. She was not wealthy. She was not known outside her town. But on Maplewood Lane, she was something close to sacred. People called her Miss Evelyn, with a tone that mixed affection and respect. Some called her the Angel of Maplewood, though she always laughed at that, waving off the title like it belonged to someone else. But the truth remained. If you needed help, whether it was a hot meal, a borrowed coat, or simply a place to sit and cry, you went to Miss Evelyn. Her home always smelled like something cooking. On Sundays, it was baked ham with brown sugar glaze. On Mondays, pots of red beans simmered with smoked turkey necks. The air inside her house carried the layered fragrance of old wood, lavender soap, and decades of cornbread baked in the same cast iron skillet her mother once used. Miss Evelyn was 68 years old, though she did not mark her birthdays with cake or candles. Age had settled into her bones, making her steps slower, but her spirit stayed as sharp as ever. Her hands, knotted with arthritis, still kneaded dough with patience. Her back, curved from years of gardening and lifting laundry baskets, still straightened every time she answered her door. She had lived alone for many years. Her husband, Henry, had passed when she was just 40, a heart attack sudden enough to leave her standing at the stove with the kettle still whistling. They had never been able to have children, though not for lack of wishing. That absence carved its own kind of space inside her, one she never tried to fill with anything but kindness. Her house became a revolving door of neighborhood faces. Teenagers stopped by to ask for advice they were too embarrassed to seek from their parents. Little kids came running for slices of pound cake, still warm from the oven. Stray dogs found bowls of water left out on the steps. Even traveling salesmen often left her porch with a bag of leftovers tucked under their arms. Miss Evelyn's daily life followed quiet, loving rituals. She rose before dawn, letting the soft crackle of the gospel radio fill her kitchen as she made coffee. By mid-morning, she moved to her garden, her sun hat tilted low to shield her eyes as she tended to collard greens and marigolds. In the afternoons, she sat on her porch swing with a needle and thread, repairing worn jackets for neighborhood kids whose parents worked too many jobs to notice frayed cuffs. And yet, for all the life that passed through her home, the house remained empty after dark. She never locked her door, not out of carelessness, but from a stubborn belief that fear should never control her life. Still, the quiet at night was deep, thick with a kind of loneliness she never admitted, not even to herself. There were moments when she would pause at her kitchen sink, staring out the window toward the street, watching porch lights flicker on one by one. Families sat down to dinner. Children rode their bikes home. Couples walked their dogs beneath the soft orange glow of the street lamps. Miss Evelyn would smile at the view, but something in her chest always ached, small but steady, like the hum of an old refrigerator that never stopped running. Her heart held space for people who needed her, but she never imagined that one evening her kindness would be called upon in a way that would change the entire direction of her life. It was a rainy night in late October when everything shifted. The clouds had rolled in heavy and low, drenching Maplewood Lane in a steady downpour. The air smelled like wet earth and distant pine. Miss Evelyn had just pulled a tray of honey, cornbread from the oven, setting it on the windowsill to cool. She wiped her hands on her apron, humming low to herself, when she heard it. The softest knock at her front door. It was not urgent. It was not loud, but something about it made her stop mid-step. Her heart tightened in a way she could not explain. After all these years, she had learned that not all trouble came screaming. Sometimes, it barely made a sound at all. With slow, deliberate steps, she moved toward the door, not yet knowing that her entire life was about to split into a before and after. The knock came again, barely more than a whisper against the wood. Miss Evelyn froze, her hands still damp from washing dishes. The clock on the wall read just past 9, late for visitors in a neighborhood where most folks were already in bed, listening to the rain tap against their rooftops. Her heart moved first, before her feet caught up. Slowly, she untied her apron and walked to the door. The porch light flickered once, as if deciding whether to help, then stayed on just enough for her to see the figure standing there. A boy, no older than 10. Small, thin, too thin for a child his age. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to him like second skin. Mud splattered across his shoes and the cuffs of his pants. His hands trembled at his sides, balled into fists not out of defiance but survival. Miss Evelyn's eyes scanned him instinctively, the way women like her learned to do without thinking. The purple bruise swelling beneath one eye, the split at the corner of his lip, scratches down the side of his neck, like he had run through thorn bushes, or worse. But it was his expression that stayed with her. A look she knew too well. Not fear exactly. Not panic. Something deeper. Exhaustion. The kind of emptiness only children who had seen too much carried with them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain gathered at his feet, forming a small puddle on her welcome mat. Then came 4 words. Broken. Hoarse. Almost swallowed by the night air. Please, don't make me go. Miss Evelyn did not need to know where he came from. She did not ask whose hands had left those marks or how long he had been running. Some things spoke louder than words. Without hesitation, she reached for him. Her hands, warm, steady, familiar, wrapped around his small, trembling shoulders. The boy flinched at her touch, like he had been bracing for pain. But when it did not come, he allowed himself to lean, just slightly, into her grasp. Come on now, baby, she murmured softly. Let's get you out of this rain. She guided him inside, closing the door behind them with a quiet finality that felt like drawing a line between danger and safety. The hallway filled with the smell of cornbread and rain-soaked earth. The lamp on the side table cast a soft, amber light across the boy's damp face that he stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto the faded rug, arms crossed tight across his chest like he was holding himself together piece by piece. Miss Evelyn did not rush him. At her age, she had learned that comfort could not be forced. Instead, she moved to the kitchen, her motions slow and deliberate. She pulled a clean towel from the drawer, set it on the table, and ladled soup into a ceramic bowl. Thick vegetable stew, still warm, with bits of smoked turkey floating on top. I made this with love and a little pepper, she said gently, placing the bowl down. It is kind on the stomach. Good for cold nights. She added a slice of cornbread, still warm from the oven, and set a glass of water beside it. Then, she stepped back, giving him space to decide if he trusted the offer. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, like a stray animal testing the air, he inched forward. His small fingers trembled as he picked up the spoon. The first bite came slow, cautious, but the second came faster, and the third faster still. He did not speak, but his body did. The sag of his shoulders, the way his breathing slowed, the flicker of disbelief that someone had made something just for him. From the sink, Miss Evelyn watched him, pretending to wipe an already clean dish. She let her gaze linger on the bruises half hidden beneath the sleeves of his wet t-shirt. The scars no child should wear. The story he could not yet tell. When he finished, he finally lifted his head to look at her, and in that single glance, she saw the question he could not speak aloud. Am I safe here? She nodded, slow, certain, without a trace of doubt. You got a name, baby? Her voice stayed soft but sure, the kind of voice that waited patiently for an answer. The boy hesitated, like even that was a risk. Then finally, barely above a whisper, he said, Daniel. Miss Evelyn smiled, saying it back like it was something sacred. Daniel, she repeated, her voice steady. That is a good, strong name. He lowered his gaze again, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Please, do not call nobody, he whispered, his voice shaking. I will be good. I can't go back. Her heart broke quietly inside her chest. She stepped closer, reached into the old cedar chest near the doorway, and pulled out a wool blanket, draping it gently over his shoulders. She let her hands rest there for just a second longer than necessary. I am not sending you back to anything that hurt you, she said calmly. Not tonight. Not ever again. Daniel's lip trembled, and for the first time that night, a single tear escaped down his cheek. Silent, slow, like it had been waiting for permission. Miss Evelyn stood there, her hands steady, her heart wide open, already knowing that from this night forward, neither of their lives would ever be the same again. The house felt warmer now, but Daniel still sat stiff and quiet at the edge of the kitchen table, as though he expected someone to burst through the door and drag him away. His small hands stayed clenched in his lap, knuckles white from how tightly he held them. Miss Evelyn moved slowly, careful not to startle him. She pulled open the old drawer by the sink and grabbed another towel, this one softer and thicker. She walked over, crouched beside him, and began gently drying his hair. Daniel flinched at first, pulling back like he was used to people's hands bringing hurt. But when her touch stayed light and careful, he let her continue. There now, she whispered, working through the wet curls on his head. We'll get you warmed up. The soup had settled in his stomach, but his small frame still shook now and then, like the fear had gotten stuck inside his bones. Miss Evelyn stood and moved back to the stove. She scooped the rest of the stew into a container and pulled out a small plate. Without making a fuss, she cut a slice of leftover peach cobbler and placed it in front of him. Sweet things help on hard nights, she said softly. Daniel looked at the plate, unsure. But after a few moments, he picked up the fork and took a small bite. His eyes closed briefly as the taste settled on his tongue, as if for one small second, the world felt less scary. From her spot near the sink, Miss Evelyn watched him closely. The bruises on his arms were not new. The swelling on his cheek told her this was not the first time someone had hurt him. Her heart tightened. She knew she could not keep him here forever without telling someone. But she also knew she had to do this right. No sirens. No uniforms. No flashing lights. That kind of fear could crush a child already on the edge. Miss Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and walked into the next room, picking up her old rotary phone. The numbers clicked as she turned the dial, her fingers steady but her heart heavy. She called the local Child Protective Services and asked to speak to someone who handled sensitive cases. Within minutes, a woman named Ms. Angela Carter was on the line. Miss Evelyn explained everything. The boy's bruises, the fear in his eyes, the way he begged not to go back. Her voice stayed calm, but her words were firm. I want someone trained for this, she said. And I do not want any patrol cars showing up here like it is some crime scene. This boy's had enough fear for a lifetime. Ms. Carter promised to come herself. No lights, no sirens, just her and a clipboard. By the time Miss Evelyn returned to the kitchen, Daniel had finished the cobbler but stayed seated, legs drawn up close to his chest, like he was ready to bolt at the first wrong move. She pulled an old patchwork blanket from the couch and wrapped it gently around his shoulders. You're safe here, she said quietly, smoothing the fabric over him. A lady named Ms. Carter is coming. She helps kids who need it. That's all. No one's here to scare you. Daniel's lip quivered. His small voice cracked as he whispered, I will be good. I promise. Miss Evelyn crouched down so they were eye to eye. You do not have to be good to stay safe, she said. You just have to be here. That's enough. For a few minutes, they sat in the quiet hum of the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked soft and slow. Rain still tapped against the windows, but the storm outside had begun to fade. When Miss Carter arrived, she knocked gently, 2 soft taps that carried no threat. Miss Evelyn opened the door to find a woman in her 40s, dressed in plain clothes with a calm face and tired but kind eyes. She held a notepad, but no badge, no gun, no uniform. Thank you for calling, Miss Carter said in a low voice. I came alone, just like you asked. Miss Evelyn stepped aside to let her in. Together, they sat at the kitchen table, just far enough from Daniel to give him space. A mess. Carter kept her voice gentle. I am here to make sure you stay safe, she told him. I am not taking you anywhere tonight. I just need to know you are all right. Daniel stayed silent at first, eyes darting from one adult to the other. Miss Evelyn reached over, her hand resting lightly on his back. You do not have to say anything tonight, she told him. You just eat. Rest. Tomorrow we will figure the rest out. Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time, his shoulders dropped, just a little, as though part of the weight he carried had loosened at a mess. Carter spent another hour talking quietly, with Miss Evelyn in the next room, writing notes, making calls to set things in motion. When she left, she promised to return in the morning with more answers. Before bed, Miss Evelyn found an old pair of her late nephew's pajamas. They were too big, but Daniel slipped into them without complaint. She set up the couch with fresh sheets and placed the blanket back over him. As she turned off the light, she paused at the doorway. Good night, Daniel, she said softly, and, for the first time that night, she heard him speak without fear in his voice. Good night, Miss Evelyn. The morning Daniel left Miss Evelyn's house, the sun had barely risen. Soft light stretched across the front porch, catching on the chipped paint and the small potted flowers she kept near the steps. Daniel stood by the door, clutching a small backpack that Miss Evelyn had packed for him. Inside were a few clean clothes, a toothbrush she had bought just for him, and one more thing, folded carefully between two shirts, a small notebook that on the very first page, in Miss Evelyn's careful, looping handwriting, were 12 words. You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody. Don't forget that. Daniel pressed the notebook to his chest as he waited for Ms. Carter's car to pull up. His hands shook as he turned back toward Miss Evelyn, standing in her doorway like she always did, steady, soft-eyed, and strong in that way only women like her could be. Will I see you again? He asked, voice low, trying not to crack. Miss Evelyn stepped forward and cupped his cheek, the same way she had the night he arrived. You will, baby, she said, her thumb tracing just under his eye. You come back when you're ready. This door doesn't close on family. And with that, Daniel climbed into the back seat of Ms. Carter's sedan. He kept his gaze on the rearview mirror until her house disappeared around the corner. Daniel's new foster home was fine. It was safe, clean. His new guardians were kind in the way strangers trying their best often are. There was food on the table, a bed with clean sheets, and people who checked in on him, but it was not the same. There were no gospel songs playing from an old radio, no smell of cornbread floating through the air. No one called him baby with that soft, unshakable kind of love. At school, the days moved slow and heavy that he kept to himself. Ate lunch alone. The other kids didn't understand the quiet boy, who flinched at sudden noises or stared too long at the floor during roll call. Some thought he was stuck up. Others called him weird. But every morning before leaving for school, Daniel opened that notebook that he ran his fingers over the words like a prayer. You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody. The words did not erase the loneliness. They did not stop the nightmares. But they steadied him, just enough that in middle school, Daniel's teacher convinced him to try out for the debate team at IT first. The thought terrified him. Speaking in front of people? Sharing ideas out loud? But something inside him, something stubborn and small but growing, said, try anyway. His first debate was shaky. His hands trembled as he read his opening statement. But with every round, he got stronger. That he learned that words could be armor, logic could be a shield, and his voice was worth hearing. By 8th grade, Daniel was winning local competitions. In high school, he earned a spot at the state finals at the awards ceremony. Holding a first-place trophy in his hands, he whispered to himself the same 12 words from Miss Evelyn's note. When college acceptance letters arrived, Daniel chose the university with the best pre-law program. Not because he had always dreamed of being a lawyer, but because deep down, he knew what it felt like to sit at a kitchen table, bruised and scared, with no one to fight for you. Law school followed, as did late nights in the library and early mornings volunteering at youth centers. He joined every youth advocacy program he could, spending weekends working with kids who reminded him too much of himself at that age. Quiet, nervous, unsure if the world had a place for them. When it came time to apply for clerkships, Daniel chose judges known for their compassion in juvenile courts. He sat in hearing rooms and watched as case after case crossed their desks, children shuffling in with downcast eyes, social workers standing by with overstuffed files, and parents too far gone to show up at all. Each time he wrote a recommendation, drafted a motion, or prepared a case summary, Daniel thought back to a small, faded house on the corner of Linden Street a night when a woman opened her door and, without hesitation, offered soup, safety, and something even bigger, belonging. By the time Daniel passed the bar, his reputation was already spreading. Colleagues described him as relentless but kind. Professors called him one of the most promising legal minds they had seen. But to Daniel, none of that mattered more than a simple promise he had made to himself years ago. When I make it, I will make sure she knows. Miss Evelyn never once asked for credit. She never knew the full reach of her kindness. But across every courtroom Daniel stepped into, every child he advocated for, her words followed him like a compass pointing him home. You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody. And as Daniel prepared for the next chapter of his life, one bigger than anything he ever imagined, he knew exactly who had made it all possible. It was a cool spring morning when the letter arrived. Miss Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug filled with coffee that had gone lukewarm. The radio played softly in the background, an old gospel hymn crackling through the speakers. She was sorting through a small pile of mail, mostly store flyers and utility bills, when her fingers stopped on one envelope. That was thick, cream-colored, with no return address, just her name. Handwritten in a style she had not seen in years but could recognize with her eyes closed. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper, the kind used for something important. The top, printed in deep blue ink, were the words, United States District Court. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. Below that came a short letter. The words were few, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Dearest Miss Evelyn, tomorrow, I will be sworn in as a federal judge. There will be cameras, reporters, and speeches. I have been asked to talk about my journey, how I got here. I will. But first, I needed you to have these words, because none of this, the title, the robe, the law, belongs to me without you. You saw me when no one else did. You fed me when I was starving for more than food. You made me believe I was worth saving. Tomorrow, when they ask me who helped build me, I will say your name, out loud, for the whole world to hear. I love you. Always have. Always will. Your son, Daniel. The letter slipped from her hand and landed softly on the table. Miss Evelyn pressed her fingertips to her lips, trying to steady her breath as the fullness of it settled inside her. For a long moment, she sat perfectly still. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she reached for the nearest tissue and dabbed her eyes. Her neighbor's grandson, Jamal, knocked at her door that afternoon. Miss Evelyn, you got to see this, he said, holding up his laptop with a wide grin. They're streaming the whole ceremony online. You are about to be famous. She chuckled softly, waving him inside. I do not need to be famous, she said, settling onto the couch. But I reckon I would like to see my boy. Jamal set the laptop on the coffee table, adjusting the screen so she could see. The official seal of the United States District Court filled the screen. Then came the ceremony. Judges in their black robes, rows of officials, a few flashes from camera crews. And then, Daniel appeared. He stood tall and poised, wearing his robe with a quiet dignity that filled the room, even through a screen. His face looked older, more defined, with silver beginning to streak the edges of his hair. But to Miss Evelyn, he was still the boy who once sat at her kitchen table with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. Daniel began with the formalities, thanking mentors, acknowledging fellow judges, recognizing his colleagues. But then, without hesitation or pause, he began to tell their story. He spoke of a rainy night, of a little boy who knocked on a stranger's door, not knowing what he would find on the other side. He described a warm kitchen, the scent of peach cobbler, and the gentle hands of a woman who did not ask for details but offered love anyway. He said her name, Miss Evelyn Parker, the woman who saved my life not once, but every day after, by reminding me that I mattered. In the courtroom, a hush fell over the audience. Some people lowered their heads. Others blinked back tears. A few judges placed their hands over their hearts. Miss Evelyn sat there, eyes glistening, her fingers pressed against her chest as though holding in something too big to contain. Jamal sniffled beside her, wiping his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Miss Evelyn," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "you are on national TV right now, and everybody loves you." But she just smiled, soft and knowing. "Baby," she whispered back, "I have been loved in the way that matters by that boy since the day he called me family." As the ceremony ended and the screen faded to black, Miss Evelyn sat quietly, her heart full in a way no words could explain. She did not need applause. She did not need a plaque or an award. Her reward was right there on that screen. A man standing tall, speaking with strength, with kindness, with a heart she had helped shape one spoonful of soup, one soft word, one night at a time. And somewhere deep inside her, she knew this was not the end of their story. It was just another beginning. The morning air was soft, cool, and full of promise. Miss Evelyn sat on her front porch, wrapped in her favorite shawl, her hands resting gently in her lap. The neighborhood had changed over the years. Children who once rode bikes past her house were now grown, some with children of their own. The magnolia tree in her yard had grown taller, its branches stretching wide like arms forever ready to embrace. She watched the street as she often did, sipping coffee and humming low under her breath. That was when she saw it, a sleek black sedan pulling slowly into her driveway. The engine went quiet. The door opened, and there he was, Daniel, older now, taller, stronger, wearing a dark suit that fit him like it was made just for him. Gray touched the sides of his hair, but his eyes were still the same, full of something soft and fierce all at once. Before she could rise from her chair, he was already on the steps. That he moved quickly, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. And then, without a word, he wrapped his arms around her, tightly, like a man anchoring himself back to the only place that ever felt like home. Miss Evelyn's hands lifted, slow but sure, pressing flat against his back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze moved softly around them. Somewhere, a wind chime rang from a neighbor's porch. Finally, Daniel pulled back just enough to look at her. His voice was low, thick with emotion. "Mama," he said, like it was the most natural word in the world. "I have been thinking about this for a long time." She smiled, her eyes shining but steady. "You always did think too much," she teased softly. Daniel gave a small, breathless laugh. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thin folder. "I want to make this real," he said, holding it out to her. "Not just in my heart, but in every way that matters. I want you to be my mother. Officially. Legally. I already filed the papers. All I need now is your signature." Miss Evelyn's gaze fell on the folder in his hand. Her heart swelled, too big for her chest, too full for words. She lifted a trembling hand, placing her fingers gently along his cheek. "Oh, baby," she whispered, her thumb tracing along his skin. "You always were my son. From the moment you knocked on that door, from the first bowl of soup, from the first time you looked at me with those tired eyes." Her voice caught for a moment, but she steadied it. "I did not need papers to know that. But if this means that much to you, then I will sign." Happily, Daniel exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. They sat together at her small kitchen table, where years ago he had eaten his first real meal of safety and kindness. As she picked up the pen, her hands trembled, but her heart was sure. With every stroke of ink, she felt the final piece of something long overdue falling into place. When she finished, Daniel took the papers, tucked them carefully back into the folder, and kissed the top of her head. "You are stuck with me now," he said, smiling through glassy eyes. Miss Evelyn chuckled, resting her hand over his. "Baby," she whispered, giving his fingers a squeeze. "I have been stuck with you since the day you said, 'Please don't make me go.'" That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of peach and gold, they sat together on the porch in no words, in no need. Just two souls, tethered by love, by choice, by family built not by blood, but by every act of care that came before this day. And as the magnolia tree swayed in the breeze, Miss Evelyn leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, finally at peace, finally complete. A mother and her son, forever.